welcome to the AI Roundtable Rubric discussion on AI and localization. Now, I think a lot of different industries at the moment are talking about artificial intelligence and whether this is the right time for them to take it up and start using it. But one of the things that we've noticed in localization is that it's kind of been around for quite a long time. I was reading up, and it seems that the first machine translation demonstration was over 70 years ago now. So it's sort of well rooted in localization for quite a long time. But I think now, from my perspective, it looks like things are being packaged in a way that people can use them and that are more accessible than they've ever been before. And so people are starting to ask whether now is the time that they should be using artificial intelligence. So today we're going to talk about a little bit about the evolution of AI in the localization industry, and specifically how people can start to apply those technologies and what are the best technologies for them to be applying. And we'll talk a bit about Rubric's position on AI and how Rubric brings that to clients. But let's start by just introducing us, people in this room.
Hi, I'm Arl Lamel. I'm a senior analyst with the market research firm CSA Research, where I focus on the use of machine translation and artificial intelligence in providing content globally for businesses, and also on how language service providers are using it. Artificial intelligence right now is really touching every aspect of the language industry. And even though the language industry was an early adopter of artificial intelligence in the form of machine translation, that rate of change has accelerated, and we're just seeing tremendous use of it right now that is affecting almost every aspect of the industry.
Hi, I'm Dom Sperling, IT Director at Rubric. We are a language service provider, and my team is responsible for configuring and managing localization pipelines for our production team, and also developing internal tooling. And we also do research and development, and that in the last year has definitely included some AI R&D projects.
Hi, my name is Alicia Baikov. I'm a program manager here at Rubric, and I oversee our client relationships as well as have insight into how we use AI in current projects and how we apply that in existing pipelines with our clients.
So let's start by looking at how AI has evolved in localization and what are the developments that are kind of making an impact now.
Yeah, the acceleration of artificial intelligence in the language industry started in about 2016 with the advent of neural machine translation. Neural machine translation is a form of generative artificial intelligence, and the technologies that underlie GPT and other technologies we're seeing were actually originally developed to support machine translation. They've since been extended to other things. So the language industry has been a pioneer in this. And neural machine translation has been transforming how language professionals work for really about the last 5-6 years. And now we're seeing it coming back with generative AI applications such as ChatGPT that are bringing broader artificial intelligence perspectives into the language industry. And we're seeing the transformation of how people work, shifting away from wordsmiths into people who deploy an array of technologies, including generative AI ones, to process content and handle increasing volumes of materials. In addition, we're seeing the deployment of artificial intelligence in the form of improved project management tools, what we call lights out project management, that handles things like vendor selection and routing of jobs, so that people can really focus on what they do best because the right projects are being directed to them. So there's a lot of use of it in the industry.
Cool. And what's on the cusp? What are the things that are going to be the big moving developments in the next few months or years?
So we're seeing two areas that are really emerging. The one that excites me the most right now is really automated quality estimation. And when that comes out, you'll be able to process content from machine translation, from large language models, whatever it may be, and have a sense of, is this good? Is it bad? Is it ugly? And then deploy human resources as needed. So it will improve response times. It will allow linguists to focus on the things where they need to give attention, rather than showing them a bunch of things where they say, okay, 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 click, send it on, or having them try to figure out whether they need to edit something. So that's one of the areas that's really exciting. Another one we're starting to see is the ability to create content directly in language based on models in other languages. So you could have a marketing text and say, give me an equivalent to this in German. And for the linguist and the LSP, this increases the need for someone who can have eyes on it and be supervisory and say, hey, this is great, or no, we need to adjust this. So it's a new line of work that offers options to be more responsive to global consumers' needs.
Okay, and what is really far away in terms of like which technologies people may be looking at and thinking, oh, how can I use this? And you wouldn't recommend them right now because they're just not ready.
So there's a lot of excitement now around the thought that generative AI applications think like humans, and so they can replace humans. And I'm very, very skeptical of this. First off, they don't actually think like humans. Think of them, the comparison's been used that they're like sophisticated autocomplete applications. And there's a great deal of truth to this. They're statistical engines. They aren't thinking the way humans do. So this notion that we'll be able to just do away with translators and other people, I think that remains as much science fiction as it did 10 years ago. We also can't expect these machines to start reasoning and creating new language. They always are stuck at some point in the past when they're trained. And so we'll continue to see the need for humans to handle new terminology and new concepts. And these things, I think, will, for the foreseeable future, remain outside the horizon of what artificial intelligence can achieve.
Yeah, I'm always reminded of the 80s when they said, okay, we're going to get rid of doctors because all of these expert systems are coming in, and then obviously that didn't happen.
So as a general comment on the where things are right now, AI is not a silver bullet. There isn't an AI that is going to be able to manage your whole multilingual product development, content development pipeline unsupervised. But I think it does offer some really great opportunities to do more with less. So I'll say a bit about how AI is used currently at Rubric. So machine translation is something that we have done for many, many years. And usually, because of the nature of our clients' content sets and their requirements for quality, we almost never do machine translation in its pure form. We are always getting humans to check behind. So that's known as machine translation post-editing. And that's the bulk of the MT that we currently employ. There is an exception to this, and that is when we're working with product teams that have a very fast release cycle. We use pure AI, pure machine translation to do last-minute changes. So if there's a development team, they're releasing software constantly, they might want to do a release. The translations were done, the last round of human translation was maybe a week ago. Any changes that have happened in that intervening week, we can automatically machine translate and ship back the resources within a few minutes, and that enables the development team to release, but it minimizes their risk of any quality issues that might come in because of the MT. Another area where AI can be used to fully automate is really in audio and video, and things like transcription, AI voice. We are definitely using those technologies where it's appropriate. So certain types of material, AI voice is totally acceptable. That might be HR videos or e-learning videos. In marketing videos, not so much. Our clients tend to prefer a voice actor for that kind of content, but this is evolving and it has improved a lot in the last year or so. I think areas where we see it coming soon, or it's going to develop, and where we are prototyping and doing research, are things like machine translation quality estimation. So usually when you send a bunch of translations to an MT, it doesn't give you back a confidence score with every sentence that it's translated. But I think because of developments with LLMs and we have tried using LLMs to ask for quality scores, and it does anecdotally seem to work quite well. I think this is something that is going to be added to machine translation services, and I'll hinted at this as well. Another area where we are currently researching is in optimization of source. So actually one of the best ways you can save money in your localization effort is to improve the quality of the source. And there are certain tasks, for example, finding similar sentences across a whole big body of source content, which are not identical, but they might mean the same. That's something you can use an LLM or some AI to determine which are the sentences that mean the same and therefore could be homogenized, and which ones are subtly different in meaning. So this is an area of research for us, and we think that this has some potential, especially on very large content sets where there's technical language, and we need to kind of try and make it as consistent as possible, and that will reduce the cost quite a lot. Another area where we see AI being useful is in adaptation of content. So after translating into French for France, you could maybe ask an AI to rework that content and make it suitable for France for Canada. Or an example that Al mentioned the other day was translating into German in the formal style versus the informal style. So if maybe the initial instructions for the job were incorrect and we didn't realize that it had to be a different style, you could maybe ask an AI to adapt that content. Things that are probably a long way off, I think, wherever it comes to management activities, those things are almost certainly not going to be replaced by AI anytime soon. So product design, content strategy, terminology management, developing glossaries, developing style guides, designing workflows, the project management, so supervision of the whole process, resolving version conflicts. That's maybe something an AI can never quite get right. It always requires somebody to think through what happened, where these different versions came from, and then which one should be the correct one. Anything to do with ethical decisions or sort of other kinds of trolley problems where there isn't a clear-cut right answer, I think that's something that AI is going to struggle with a lot. And simply being accountable. AIs can't be held responsible for their own output. At the end of the day, a human has to take responsibility, and therefore the human really needs to have confidence that the AI is being used in the right way, and that they're safe to take responsibility for the final result. So I think all those areas, they're not going anywhere anytime soon, and this is something where we are certainly involved with our clients from product design stage right through to publication or deployment of an app, and we like to take this very holistic, comprehensive view, and consulting in that way to help our clients optimize their processes is where we see us adding value in the future, and that is going to include figuring out where AI fits in and helping to design those workflows, those integrations, to make sure it all runs smoothly. So that's how I see the role of Rubric evolving in the future.
I think in that, I think both of you, Al and Dom, you were talking about the sort of like the creation of a new type of job for people, and you were just saying about the responsibility of that. I suppose that could be seen as a problem, but then it can also be like an opportunity. What is the nature of that job? What are people going to have to be either training people in or looking out for?
Maybe I'll just jump in here and say I really liked Dom's answer, because it highlights all the stuff that an LSP does beyond just translation. And if the value proposition of an LSP is we translate, well, that may get replaced. But if you're doing all these other things and you're leveraging technology, then you're offering a compelling value. And when you ask now about new jobs, an analogy that I heard recently that I really liked is that we're at a point where language professionals have to shift from being cooks to being chefs. In the sense they're not just trying to, cook up a tasty dish of words. They have to be using all the technology and running the kitchen to produce the tasty dishes. And that's a mindset shift. And AI is going to enable them to do far more if they embrace it. But that does mean they have to figure out how to use it and not try and hang on to what's been in the past.
I think that's a great analogy.
Yeah.
I think it's also the shift from having the human in the loop to an expert in the loop. It's no longer going to be sufficient to be a generalist, and because AI will be able to do a general translation. What we will be looking for is the experts in subject areas, or being able to supervise and oversee those very now more sophisticated technologies that are being developed. So I think the roles will become much more sophisticated and much more kind of high expertise will be required.
That's interesting. Go ahead, Al.
If I can just add to that, at CSA Research, we like to talk about human at the core, because often in the loop has been used basically to describe somebody whose job is to clean up after the technology. Think of it as MT or AI janitors, where if it's at the core, it's somebody really running everything. So we prefer to talk about it that way, just to avoid the idea that, the AI is going to do everything and you're just, dusting up the last little bits to make it good for use.
I would add to that also, we've seen the evolution of LLMs in 2023, and that is hinting at more sophisticated, higher quality MT engines coming soon. And I think that really what might be a game changer is the ability to fine tune a machine translation model in a meaningful way. So to use domain specific, high quality training data to really optimize the quality of the machine translations coming out. And this is something which we don't really see any practical working services in production right now. We have tried a few things. There are signs that it's coming, but this is something I think will make a big difference. And it's something where the human expertise is really going to be needed to make sure that training data is really high quality to start with, and also to feed it in the right way so that it's interpreted correctly.
If I could add one thing, Dom, earlier you mentioned terminology management and how that's going to remain human. And that's actually one of the keys to making all this AI work, is the creation of what are called knowledge graphs, which come out of terminology work. And that's what starts putting the intelligence into artificial intelligence and moving it past being what some people have called parrots, statistical parrots. Once you start having that human curated knowledge, then the MT and the other AI can actually start doing some of these things.
What are the kind of common risks that people encounter when they're implementing AI?
Yeah, so one of the big risks right now comes from overestimating what AI can do. And there's a lot of confusion about this that comes both from tech press people who believe hype and from the artificial intelligence itself. So if you ask ChatGPT what it can do for your business, it's going to give you a whole list of things, most of which it can't actually do for your business. And so one of the risks is trusting all this and then making business decisions based on that. So earlier this year, we were aware of a couple companies in Silicon Valley that let their localization teams go because they trusted, Gen AI can just replace them. Well, they very quickly found out these teams were doing a lot more than translation, but now they had, let go a decade's worth of institutional knowledge that they're going to have to rebuild from scratch. So there's this risk about jumping into the technology too quickly and in ways that end up harming what it is that companies do. Another risk really comes from what's often called hallucination. And over time, I've become less and less satisfied with the term hallucination because people use it now to mean, oh, the MT got the AI got something wrong. But often it's the AI is doing exactly what it was designed to do, and you just disagree with that. So one of the risks then becomes, can you trust this output without having someone really paying attention and monitoring it? And the more we trust it, the greater the risk becomes, because often the errors can be quite subtle. And then I guess a third risk I would point out is that people often make these decisions based on the best performance they see from AI, which is in English. If you look at the training data that this is trained on, it's over half of it's in English in most cases. And if you look at Common Crawl, which is what OpenAI has used, 85% of the data is from English and European languages. So once you cross out of that Anglo-European realm, the performance goes way down. And if you've made your decision based on the best case, what are you going to do when now you're deploying it someplace where it just doesn't work to that level?
I think that's an interesting point. There seems to be at the moment a trade-off between performance and reliability. You can sort of superheat your LLM, and it will do increasingly impressive things, but then it will also fail in kind of unusual and unexpected ways, and which is what we are calling hallucination. So yeah, I think there's some development that needs to happen there, but there's certainly, there's some good signs that the MT quality is going to go up, and I do like the development of scoring, confidence scoring, quality estimation, because I think that will help to focus the post-editing, the human effort that goes into checking, and we may be very able to identify in a very robust and reliable way which are the high priority segments for a human to go and check and which ones are very low risk, and that will be very useful.
I can certainly see that that becomes, especially for those really small languages with not very many people, but that are often lucrative markets that we kind of write about sometimes. Where does the LSP fit within that? How does what sort of questions should people be asking to work out if the markets they're trying to serve can use AI at the moment?
I think one of the questions to ask is I mean, and this has to be experimentally determined, but is the performance at the level that we can actually rely on it? And what you'll find is for some markets, probably yes. But if you look at, you talk about smaller languages, look at Hungarian or Latvian, those are often very complex languages, grammatically speaking. And so the lack of resource then is magnified just because of the intrinsic difficulty. The other thing to look at is the domain of whatever we're doing covered in the LLM or other AI? And again, for many of these smaller languages, it's not going to be. So you might find something like software user experience may be well covered, but if you're talking about entertainment or something, it may be poorly covered. So the value is that an LSP can bring human expertise to say, when do we need to step in and make intelligent decisions rather than having to accept on blind faith that this LLM is doing what we want it to. And I think emphasizing that you have this cultural capacity, this technical understanding, the applicable skills is where an LSP really can say, we offer something beyond what the LLM does.
Security and privacy are often talked about with it in terms of AI, particularly with ChatGPT. What are the things people should be thinking about with regards to them?
One of the ones to look at is always when you're using an AI tool, look at the terms of service. And often if you read them closely, you'll find things that your lawyers might throw a fit about if they were really paying attention. It's always best to have your own direct agreement with the AI provider rather than relying on an agreement somebody else has. Like, for instance, if you look at terms of service for some of the popular LLMs, they will say, we don't use your data, but then there will be a little asterisk that says we may retain your data for 30 days or 60 days for quality checking purposes. Well, that's going to be unacceptable for somebody who's having you translate their patent filings or whatever, where leakage of that can create problems. So always look at the terms of service and check the entire tool chain. Any sort of tool chain is only as strong as its weakest link. And we'll see people who will set up these very robust security protocols for something like AI, but then they start passing this stuff around through various less secure chains that create problems. So the security is a big factor right now. You need to audit your chains. Reliability of the systems can be an issue when you're looking at enterprise grade deployments, throughput. There's a lot of things you need to analyze in terms of, can this meet whatever the requirements are for a system. There's a term we use at CSA Research called the IDIs, security, reliability, all these things that end in IDI that represent enterprise grade requirements and that go together. And so look at all of those holistically and critically to say, is this going to meet my requirements or not?
And from the Rubric end, like, what are given that Rubric focuses on that kind of whole pipeline, what are the weak points that you often see?
I think Al's mentioned security and reliability and privacy, and I think those are all certainly concerns. Another concern might be bias. The models are only as good as their training data. Maybe they're going to be too influenced in one way or another by their training data. And yeah, I guess they need to be prompted in the right way to eliminate that bias. I think another area which is still in need of some development is user experience, and having a good interface for a human to use that is going to make them be able to optimally collaborate and work with AI services to produce the output in the most efficient way possible. So, traditional computer-assisted translation interfaces are probably not well suited to the era of AIs and LLMs. And I think this is going to develop. I'm not a designer myself. I have no idea how, but I think that it will, it will evolve.
Another thing that we talk about the Rubric quite a lot is the scalability, and I know you talked about a lot of the services don't have the throughput at the moment. What are the factors people need to think about in terms of scalability?
Yeah, so throughput is a big one. If you look at on-demand machine translation as the ideal thing, you expect a latency for volume of under 500 milliseconds, with about 250 to 300 milliseconds ideal. So you type something, you get it back. If you look at GPT-4 right now, it's sped up, but we're still talking about something like on a day of peak demand, maybe 2-3 words per second, which is far from a scalable solution for real-time needs. So you have to look at this throughput. There's often volume caps on these things, and there's ways to work around that. But at present, the best thing for OpenAI is you set up multiple accounts that work in parallel, which is really not what you'd like from a scalable enterprise solution, saying go sign up for another account and start trying to jigger these things so they all work together. So that's a major concern. And along with that, when you're working with generative AI in particular, you're having to send prompts that contain information. And every time you modify something, you do what's called chain of thought prompting, you have to retransmit that. And that means you get bigger and bigger prompts. And when you're paying per token going in, the more you modify this, the higher the cost gets. And that's often easy to ignore because it seems like it's magical, it's instant. From the user experience, it seems kind of free and easy, but it can add up. So you have to look at the total cost of this. If you're sending large chunks of text to process, you have to be aware of what's the maximum prompt length. So you have to include your instructions and what you're doing and have it fit within that length. So there's a lot of concerns, and this goes back to Dom's point about user experience. The tools aren't really set up to handle this in an intelligent way. And so you can be going along and think things are working until suddenly they're not, because you've hit one of these limitations. And so there's a lot of work that needs to be done to make this really scalable and usable at the enterprise level.
I can give an example of a scaling issue which we hit with one of our research projects this year. So we have these very large content sets, sometimes 1 million+ words, and that is actually too big to give to an LLM as a prompt. I think that, you know, there are features now that enable you to upload additional data, and maybe 1 million words would be no trouble now, but certainly at the time this was a limit. And so the strategy we used was to use more kind of traditional algorithms to analyze that 1 million word set, identify clusters of similar sentences in terms of words, and then we would use the AI to determine if they were also similar in meaning, as well as being kind of close to each other in terms of words. So that worked out quite well, but it was, you know, in our experimentation, we certainly noticed, especially when we used our own internal models to try and avoid click charges, the performance was really hard to get to an acceptable level.
And what are the improvements that would need to be made, and by whom would they be made in order to get it to the stage where it needs to be for that kind of scalability?
I would say one of the first improvements that could be made is persistence of state. By that we means that the engine remembers what you've done. Right now, then I mentioned this, you have to retransmit the data. Each request to an LLM is treated as its own independent thing. So it's what you did a moment ago disappears down the memory hole unless you resend it. Having some sort of persistence of state would be important. Now that raises security and other issues. So it's not as if, you know, you can just do it and say it's good. That's something that the developers have to figure out. Another thing that needs to be done is figuring out best practice for prompting. And that's something that, you know, you as a company can be doing, individuals can be doing, figuring out what works for what you need to do. And I think over time, there will emerge consensus ways as to how to handle prompting that's going to be efficient. That's one. And then the other one that I'd say has to go back to the LLM developers is making it easier to train them with your own data. That's started to emerge, but up until now, the best approach has been what's called RAGs, retrieval augmented generation, where it's what Dom was describing as a form of it. You send, you know, a bunch of your data along with the prompt and say, answer it in this context. And then you have to have a way to find what that relevant data is. So it's not exactly easy. It would be a lot easier if you could just send all your data and say, remember this, now answer it in this context. But that's something the developers have to do. And yeah, they're talking in those lines, but it's not yet there for individual companies, really.
Alisa, do you want to mention some of the pilots that we have planned in 2024 with our clients?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we have some exciting ideas that we want to develop in next year. Two of them revolve around source content. So we want to look at preparing source content for machine translation. There's more interest, in our clients to use more machine translation, but how do we make that happen for content which hasn't been really written with machine translation in mind? So there could be, we think there is scope in that area, and ensuring that the text is more concise, more consistent, doesn't include any slogans or puns that will trip up machine translation further down the line. So this is one of those areas. We're also looking to optimize source content. Dom mentioned that before. we're looking at standardizing the content. So we often find that our clients may have multiple copywriters writing copy which is similar but not exactly the same, and then we're translating that copy into multiple languages, and the client is paying multiple times for translating very similar but not identical content. If we can catch it at source and standardize it, we think that could bring actual savings further down the line in translation costs. But also standardized copy, make it neater, make it more consistent throughout. Another area we're looking at is regional adaptation. So AI could probably very well and easily tackle issues such as adapting German from the German content to Swiss, for example, by following a specific list of grammar rules or punctuation rules that we would tell it to adapt. So these are the three areas. But we also do text-to-speech successfully with our existing clients, and we've been doing that for 2 years, and that's another area which is really fast developing, and I think requires retesting constantly as more and more better quality voices are being added by the tool providers. So this is an area where we're trying to encourage more customers to consider this as an option. Perhaps they want to use voiceovers more widely, but don't think it's affordable. The voices have got so good that there's much higher acceptance now in various target languages. So we're seeing that that is definitely a growing area as well. Transcription is another application we use regularly, but that's been around for some time. But in all of these applications, we find you still need the expert overseeing it, checking, double checking. AI is not infallible, and you don't want to go that road without making sure your content is all correct.
I could mention one more thing about our just general strategy as the AI landscape evolves rapidly in the next months and years. We are always focused and always have been focused on process optimization and having very good, robust platforms for managing content. And we are continuing to invest in that sort of workflow optimization so that as AI services mature, we're going to be ready to plug them in at any stage of the localization pipeline, right from authoring right through to release and publishing. So this continues to be a big focus of Rubric's and something our clients really appreciate, and hopefully means that we will be ready when these AI services mature and come online.